Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Miskatonic University Radio, a podcast exploring Fantasy Flight Games as Arkham Horror the card game. I'm Dane.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Ben.
And today we're revisiting the Circle Undone to talk about all things done and all things not done, including the return to Circle Undone. I'm assuming that the Circle was never actually done, right? There's just never a done phase of the Circle. It's just still undone.
I think you kind of just keep looping around it forever. You know, it's like a,
it's
like a NASCAR race. You're doing like 200 laps or something.
And I thought the circle was like, a metaphor, not a metaphor, but comparison to, like a cycle that we're trying to break. The cycle of Cthulhu's or Assidoths or whatever. No?
I was hoping there would be like a permanent that you could get that's a circle. And it's like slightly not together, and no matter how hard you try, you have to take a combat test to push it together, and no matter what, you can't do it. It's just like impossible. It's like the thing in Labyrinths where you take that test to like scream or something, and then nobody hears you, and it doesn't matter anyway.
It's probably in the puzzle box somewhere. It's just like MJ probably had like several paragraphs describing that when you try to solve the puzzle box, but she couldn't fit it on the back of the agenda, or the act. So
this is all very dumb, but at least we're talking about shapes. I can never be completely mad as long as we're mentioning some shapes. Yeah, Circle Undone. I mean, pretty fun campaign, right? We like it.
One of our favorites for sure.
I think it does.
I think together in general.
I think it does have a relatively controversial kind of status among players as a whole. Like, I think there's some people that really don't like it.
Really? Wow.
Isn't that true? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I've talked to some people that really don't like it. And I think we'll probably might touch on some of those reasons today. But like, I think in solo it's not as fun, and there's some mechanics that like just people don't like. So
maybe it's all the secret players who just press one button, and now they're getting punished for pressing that one button.
Well, no. See, seekers just pass those tests.
Yeah.
That's true.
This is an aside, but I'm really curious. Which campaign do the solo players like? Because I feel like every campaign we talk about, it's like, oh, the solo players hate it because this one scenario is virtually impossible for solo.
People seem to like Innsmouth a lot, even though it has the
Innsmouth with the massive maps that are probably.
I know. I was gonna say, wait.
Solo?
I mean, I think like I don't know if the giant maps are as much as a hindrance as we think. I mean, that has a lot of actions to move around, but I think it's more like what's in the encounter deck, or even like how long it takes to set up or take down the scenario. Like I was talking to someone, and they don't like Dreamlands because like it has Kadath, which we like, but you have to set up the scenario 5 times.
Which you do.
Which, I mean, if you're playing solo, you expect like a 30-minute game. And that
Innsmouth also, I think, in most scenarios, Innsmouth gives you a pretty high doom threshold. I think what really sucks for solo is big maps and like low doom threshold, or doom threshold that doesn't scale with like the number of players or something. So yeah, maybe it's not so bad. But anyway, so yeah, Circle Undone. There it is.
Here it is.
Yeah, we've done a couple of these before. Usually we just kind of like have some questions that kind of talk about the campaign, and as we reflect back on it, is this 3 years old now? 2.5 maybe? It's like 4 cycles ago, but
I think it was like 2019 maybe.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's been a while.
If this campaign were a human child, it could almost walk, right? I don't know anything about children, but
I think children get up on the feet faster than that usually, but I don't know either. So, all right. So yeah. So first up, this campaign introduced the Prologue Scenario, which we haven't seen since, and it's like, how do we think of this? Do we think it's fun? Not fun? It's just kind of a little scenario you play as like these NPC-ish characters that you never play again. But how you do kind of affects some parts of the campaign. I don't know. What do you guys think of the prologue?
I remember now, and I'm starting to understand why people hate Circle Undone, because I completely forget that there's a prologue that you have to play. I think that like the prologue is fun. It's a neat concept by itself, and it was cool to see like right when it came out and to play through blind. But returning to it, I will never play this live again. I will always go to the arcane sorcery somehow on the internet and play this without having to set it up, because there's a fair bit of setup involved in that you have to go into your collection and collect very specific cards to put in people's hands and put in people's play areas. And then you play for about a half an hour, and then it's done. And then it's like, okay, pack it up, and then you have to get out a whole new set of stuff for the first scenario. Which for me, that's just too much for live play. But suppose there was some sort of way that you could play it online where the entirety of the setup would be done for you. Great, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think I like it as like it's kind of like a little puzzle challenge because you have like 7 rounds at most basically, but usually less, and it's kind of trying to solve like you have limited resources, you can't rely on like drawing stuff from your deck, so you kind of like have almost all of the pieces of the puzzle out at the start of the game, other than like encounter cards. So you can kind of try to puzzle out like, oh, how can I get the most clues? How can I survive as long as possible? But it has a lot less replayability because at least like I usually play 3 or 4 players, so it's usually like all the people are there, so there's not that much difference every time you play it, which kind of kills it. So, and Return to doesn't really change it too much. It like makes the encounter cards a little bit harder. So I appreciate in Return to how they added the option to like kind of randomize it using the tarot cards.
Yeah, I would just
right,
add that when we're playing a campaign, I mean, we're all adults, we have jobs, we have whatever. Like, often we're either like hanging out for a weekend and we're trying to get through a whole campaign, like 8 scenarios, or we're like scheduling some kind of weekly thing, and there's already like it's going to take 8 weeks to get through this. It's really hard to say like, oh well, let's add a 9th thing here at the beginning, right? Like it's the campaign's already really long, and I think the prologue, it's very cool the first couple of times you do it, but for me, it's just it doesn't quite justify the extra time, including the setup time that it takes to do it. But I still like the idea, and I still think it's neat. We might talk about this later, but I think this was something we complained about originally, was it doesn't really affect the rest of the campaign that much. Like you eventually see these people again, but not until very close to the end, and it's very hard to add them to your decks. There's kind of a very specific set of tasks you have to do. So because of that, it feels like you can skip it and you don't really lose anything. It doesn't really make the campaign any less fun if you just skip it.
Yeah, like the number of clues you get like makes scenario 2 a little bit easier, and depending how they die, has impacts on scenarios 6. Yeah, so
yeah.
And yeah, if you manage to keep them alive to like round 7 or something, you have a chance to like get them as an ally. But I don't think I've ever actually succeeded at that, so I don't actually.
It's pretty hard to do.
So
you have to remember exactly the way that each of them needs to be taken. Like somebody needs to be taken by the Spectral Watcher, somebody needs to be pulled into the mist, etc. And like, it's just, for me, it's never worth it for that, because of the fact that Dan said, which is basically just that it basically affects nothing else. And their fate, the entirety of their fate, whether or not you get them as an ally or you see them as an enemy or just nothing happens, is in one scenario. It'd be really nice if that was kind of spread out and you get to like kind of see some remnants if they're, like being dragged all over the spectral realm somewhere. You could see like a little bit of that in scenario 3, a little bit of that in scenario 4, something like that. Even
if everything goes great and you do get them, you save them and they get added to your decks, that only happens for the last 2 scenarios of the game. At that point, it's like, who cares? So
yeah.
One thing I would like to mention that I never noticed before, Valentino Rivas's art. Does he remind anyone else of Ellis from Die Hard?
Yeah.
And you're going to be upset, but I still haven't seen Die Hard.
It's crazy. I mean, he's got the same kind of goatee, he's got the same kind of smile on his, kind of shit-eating grin. I don't know. It's fun.
Yeah.
Okay, I could see that.
Yeah, I had one other question. If they did like a standalone where they had like kind of that was similar to this, where you didn't use the regular investigators, that you used like some subset of like 10 investigators and had like a puzzle type of thing, would that be fun if it was like, oh, its own little standalone, or would that kind of suck because depending on how replayable it is, I guess. I don't know.
I think they could definitely improve on it. Like Batboy said in chat, I totally agree with it. Just that I would love to see this idea sort of revisited in the future in a different way, like used and kind of all of our critiques, or at least some of them, addressed in a way where it has a little bit more impact on the rest of the scenario, and like it forces me to want to go to it, because everybody likes the kind of starting in the middle of action type thing. you've seen it in video games before, like Mega Man and stuff like that, where you're just pitted against this boss or whatever that you're supposed to lose against. And no matter how hard you try, you just can't win. Right? So, like, some games start like that, and I think that that was kind of the intent with this. But for me, not factoring in the fact that you have to set everything up was a little bit of a miss.
I mean, to answer Ben's question, if they made a standalone like that, I would play it once and possibly enjoy it, and then probably never play it again. Because I think a lot of the replayability and fun of the game comes from bringing your own deck or playing around with different decks. So any type of, yeah, I mean that is one thing that I think kind of limits how fun this campaign is that you don't really get to like make whatever deck you want to bring it. Kind of also like City of Archives has this problem a little bit also.
Yeah, which is another polarizing scenario.
Yeah, I think that is another kind of it. But both City of Archives and this are interesting narratively, and I'm glad that they did both things. It's just that I'm usually quite satisfied to skip this if we go back and do TCU again.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. I guess as mentioned in chat, it's a little bit like Barkham. Like I played Barkham once, and it's fun. But
yeah, Barkham was fun. It was a good time.
Much motivation to do it again. That one's a little bit like you at least can like build decks for those guys, for the dogs or whatever in Barkham, but it's kind of like, oh, you do it once and then it doesn't have as much replayability. So why don't we move on? So there was a mechanic, keys introduced for the greater good, which kind of became a core mechanic of Innsmouth, and I think we've seen it in a couple other scenarios as well. What do you guys think of this keys mechanic? Now that we've definitely seen it a lot in Innsmouth, along with this initial iteration, are we kind of glad this stuck around, or is it kind of like wearing on us now?
I think keys are a really versatile mechanic, honestly. I think that like when they first appeared here, they kind of just made sense with the rules. It was like, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting. And I wasn't really expecting for it to be a larger thing, but the way they implemented it in Innsmouth made a lot of sense, and you can do just a lot with this mechanic. You can use them for a whole bunch of different things, and I think that one of our critiques of Innsmouth was that the keys weren't used as much. Like they weren't used in really cool or interesting ways. It was more to just sort of develop the storyline. And for me, one of my favorite parts about ever using keys ever is in this scenario where at the end you have to collect all of them, and then there's a bunch of flavor text about what each one does when it gets clicked into the box or whatever. And keys can represent anything. So it's kind of like, I feel like it could be an evergreen mechanic eventually if they wanted to re-implement it again beyond Innsmouth. And it'd kind of be easy to do that. So I honestly really like the mechanic.
Yeah, it's definitely cool. I mean, I think to the extent that we've ever criticized it, it's only been that we wish they did more with it. Right. Like, I think the only downside to keys is that sometimes it ends up feeling not that different from just collecting all the clues in a scenario. Like you have to collect a bunch of clues to advance the act or to open a door or something. A lot of times, the keys are just a reason to make you collect clues, right? And I think that For the Greater Good is a pretty good implementation of them, and a couple of the Innsmouth scenarios also did interesting things with them. So yeah, I really like keys. I would love to see them used more. I just would like to see them get even more creative with how they work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the benefit of keys is, like, yeah, they make you collect clues, but that's what most stuff does. But it's kind of like they tie objects to certain locations that clues, because they're more generic, can't be tied that way. So like how they do in the 40 Greater Good, you need to get the skull, you have to get the clues from one location, and then you have to bring the skull to some other location to benefit from it. So I guess that's where the versatility mechanically kind of comes in. It lets you have some other object you have to carry on the board other than clues directly.
Yeah, so. But I guess what makes it really fun is when it's more than just this key has to go here, this key has to go here. For the Greater Good has an encounter card that does bad stuff to you depending on which keys you have, which is it's not incredibly really a fun card, but that kind of thing that's like triggering off of who has the keys is cool. I think we've seen enemies that hunt after people that have keys, which is kind of fun. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see more of that. Just anything that like makes like having a key has gameplay effects and changes the way you play. I think it is really exciting, and I would love to see more of that.
Yeah, you can treat it like a hot potato, like you got to pick it up and bring it somewhere and drop it as fast as you can, type of thing, where bad stuff happens.
Exactly.
Yeah. So. I think the my favorite scenario that keys are were used in was the 7th scenario in Innsmouth, where all the keys could do different things. Like you could spend them and they get put on the scenario card. And I guess minor spoilers for the 7th scenario in Innsmouth, but they all do different things that feel impactful. Like you could use it one to open a door, for example, or you can like use another one to pick up a weird statue and then flip that statue to be a stronger version of itself with another key. So like you can use them as kind of like an interesting way that like clues would just kind of feel bland using. But I think the one criticism that I have of keys is that you can only give them to other people. You can't take them from other people, which was really annoying in some aspects because they're I mean I guess in other Arkham Horror games like Arkham Horror 3rd Edition and maybe in Eldritch Horror and stuff, you can kind of trade items and it's sort of like a consensual sort of two-way thing. And in this specifically, you can only give your keys. You cannot like take them from another investigator provided the consent. So
yeah, that is a little weird. Like it's an action to give keys. Feels like it should be an action to be able to take them.
Yeah,
it could be some type of consent thing where you don't want to like say, "Oh, I'm taking an action. I'm taking your keys" or whatever.
Yeah. I would love to see. I would love to see it. There just be an action, which is choose another investigator at your location. You and that investigator may exchange any number of keys.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. Yeah.
I mean, so
Yeah.
maybe it's possible they had that and they play tested and like, oh, this makes it slightly too easy or something. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what happened.
Probably not.
Yeah. All right. So, what about? There's a couple other scenarios that kind of have unique mechanics that we haven't really seen repeated, like Secret Name, Union Disillusion, and probably the biggest one is In the Clutches of Chaos. How do we think these mechanics work in the Arkham setting? Like, do they smoothly transition into it and keep you in the setting, or is just some of them like kind of take you out?
Yeah, I mean, to me, like Clutches of Chaos is the one that really stands out among these, right? Because one of the great things about this game is that every scenario has usually something mechanically going on that is kind of unique. So, like for instance, even like Wages of Sin, which isn't mentioned here, has like the 2 different encounter decks, right?
Yeah.
Which is also kind of like a unique mechanic. But to me, like Clutches of Chaos is very unique, or is completely unique in that it totally messes with the way that advancement, like the way the act and agenda decks work. You're not just trying to progress through a deck kind of linearly by collecting clues. You're kind of doing that, but mostly you're trying to, do Pandemic. You're trying to like keep the explosions from going off. And instead of just adding Doom, you're adding these breaches and whatever's happening. So like I do like that scenario, and I would love to see more stuff like that. It keeps things fresh, and I think that in general one of the reasons that I like TCU a lot is it does have this kind of gameplay creativity where the scenarios do feel really different to play, and they are interesting challenges that make you think differently.
Yeah, to kind of expand on that a little, I think that that's kind of one of the reasons why I also really like the Circle Undone, because the first scenario or the first campaign that we saw that happen in was Carcosa. Like Dunwich kind of had its own stuff, but for the most part sort of stayed within its own box. And Carcosa kind of broke that entirely open with like having 2 agenda decks in one. It had like the whole unreliable narrator thing that was happening the entire time. Forgotten Age kind of got away from it again because it was mostly focusing on explore and like the tallies. And then we come to Circle Undone, where it has almost every single scenario has its own little thing going on. Like even in the Secret Name, as mentioned, we are reintroduced to rats, which are everywhere all the time and just kind of an annoying enemy. And then that scaling health thing makes them really annoying to deal with and kind of actually a threat for some investigators, which is really cool because it changes the way that we look at just a very basic core set card. And going to Union and Disillusion, the Brazier thing, that's a whole new thing that nobody's ever really seen before. So like the whole of the Circle Undone has its own identity, but also within it, each scenario has very defined mechanics that make them all feel unique. Even like for the greater good, right? You've got keys, which were a new thing, and they're much more memorable that way. I think it's hard to pick a greatest hits because all of them are so unique and kind of hit you in different ways. Whereas like Dunwich for me is just kind of unremarkable in that sense because the whole thing was sort of not really unique. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Dunwich has uses its uniqueness in like how the scenarios are like organized or set up. Like you can remember train or like exploring the museum or whatever, but there's not like anything crazy going on with the acts or agendas. Which
Yeah.
after that, we've seen a lot of it in Carcosa, as you said, and we see it in this, and we see it in future scenarios, which is always fun. I think one critique I've heard about some of these scenarios is they're like a little bit too finicky. Like you have to keep track of like, oh, Brown Jenkins on the board, so the enemies have extra health, or oh, it's it's agenda whatever, so they have
Oh,
plus
sure,
two.
sure.
Do you think that hinders your gameplay at all? Like, do you come back when you play through it just like, oh shoot, I forgot this guy had plus 2 health or whatever? Or do you think it's like a reasonable level? It's definitely not like Batman level of confusion, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think I mean, that's always a challenge in this game if where you have to keep track of stuff like that. And as you mentioned, that was one of the things about Batmom was that it, I think, asked even more of us than the official campaigns usually do. I didn't think that Circle Undone was really any worse in that regard than typical FFG campaigns, although I could see the argument that maybe it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some mechanics that get a little weird, like the Brown Jenkin thing that you mentioned, because the agenda has like they all get some amount of health, and then Brown Jenkin makes them all get plus some amount of fight. Nahab makes them all get plus something else. So like, there's a lot to keep track of in that there's different cards in play, but there's not so much that I become overloaded or forget because the map is kind of small, specifically in the secret name. I think that if with a bigger map um, Union of Disillusion or like Clutches of Chaos, it might have been harder if you're using those kinds of mechanics with it. But they kind of maybe knew that and made bigger maps, less complex in that way. So
Okay. Um. Yeah. Anything else to say on this stuff? I guess not. So,
Jenkins is still one of the most terrifying things in the face of the Arkham experience.
yeah, he is very scary.
I, I guess we could maybe mention that Union and Disillusion honestly feels like one of the less interesting scenarios to me, just because by the time you get to that point, you've done a lot of really weird scenarios that have cool, interesting things going on, and then you get to Union and Disillusion, and it's like, okay, there's tests where you add up 2 different stats. Like that's not that weird. It's not a bad scenario. It's just that feels to me like the normalist DCU scenario.
Yeah. I mean, that one also brings back like the bird mechanic that we saw in
Birds.
Dunwich.
The bird. I mean, isn't that just whippoorwills? Like, what else is going on there?
It's
Maybe there's
whippoorwills and there's
whippoorwills.
crows and there's also like Psychopomp song, things that make you
Yeah.
take extra damage when you
That's
would receive an instance of
that's more
damage.
of a theme than really like a
Well, sure,
mechanic.
sure.
Yeah, that's true. Um,
Yeah, let's we can move on to the next one.
so Haunted was a big mechanic throughout the whole campaign where you'd have locations that would have some type of failure penalty if you failed when investigating. Do you think this was like an effective way at changing how you think about investigating in this campaign?
Yes.
I love Haunted, and I would love to see it become a core mechanic and be reused in like all campaigns. It's not perfect. Like I would love to see other ways to make investigating more interesting as well, but I think it definitely makes investigating more interesting, right? Like I guess if there's a knock against it, it's maybe that it just kind of enshrines seeker supremacy because seekers can just pass tests and they don't need to do some kind of nonsense like play look what I found or skeleton key or something to pick up clues. So maybe it is kind of harsher on some classes and some decks than others, but I just like the idea of making you think a little bit more before you just kind of blindly spam investigate 3 times on the same location.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll
Totally.
be like up by 2 or whatever, which like 75% of the time you'll pass, and you might just do that 3 times, and if you fail, it's no big deal. But in this, it's like you really got to think about the additional cost of failure. Like some of these are kind of nasty. Some
Yeah.
make you drop clues, or you take damage, or make enemies attack you, or move around, or whatever. So
Remember also that Circle Undone was, I believe, was the cycle where Drawing Thin was printed. And
That's
you know,
ridiculous.
we and everybody else immediately saw Drawing Thin and said, "This is an incredibly powerful card, right?" And it certainly is. But we also noticed as we played through Circle Undone with it that Circle Undone does kind of have like Drawing Thin hate built in because of all the haunted locations, because of a couple chaos tokens. So it does kind of punish sort of like it punishes things like Drawing Thin a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it
definitely.
probably punishes survivors the most, right? Because they,
Yeah.
as you mentioned,
Whenever
they
I
have a lot
think
of.
of this scenario or this campaign, I'm always think never play Survivor. Like
Yeah,
I just never want to.
and I mean, before, like at this point in the game's running, I don't think Survivor had that many great tools for getting clues. They didn't have keyring yet. I mean, they had like flashlight and look what I found, but look what I found relies on failing. You know,
Right.
um,
Right.
I think Winging
so
It was out probably.
winging it, yeah. So like a lot of their stuff is like reducing the shroud down, but they not as much as like stacking up their int, which sometimes is a lot stronger at getting clues consistently. So, but
Yeah.
uh,
I think one of the interesting things, and Bad Boy kind of brought it up in chat about like how the difference between playing in multiplayer and playing solo is. I could imagine that Haunted specifically would make the solo experience much harder, and I could see very much why, if you're playing anything but somebody with at least four in, why this campaign specifically would be much harsher, just because of the fact that Haunted pervades through the entire thing, and then also each of the different mechanics make it kind of tough to play, or maybe just different to play at solo, because there's so much more going on than like a campaign like Dunwich, where it's very straightforward. Aren't a lot of a lot of bells and whistles that are doing a whole bunch of different things. Just having like something like the Nethermist thing that comes out sometimes and just hunts after you and makes everything just worse would be so harsh if you're playing somebody like Roland or somebody who might not be able to get clues very easily. So I think that that's definitely another point for Haunted.
yeah, yeah. I imagine a solo, because in solo you need to be able to do everything, and it's hard to be like a master of one thing. So it might be, yeah, it's
But
probably a little harder to consistently grab clues. I don't know.
Yeah.
but solo people also, cards like Scene of the Crime or Drawn to the Flame or Working a Hunch are really powerful, right? Like
Yeah.
cards that pick up one or two clues without even having to do a test, and those are excellent against Haunted, right?
So that's right.
Yeah, that's
That's right.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can make you try to build more in like the hard or expert sense, where you want to like skip doing tests as much as you can, um, to avoid the haunted effect. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I maybe don't that I'm sad about Haunted is that it's called Haunted, because I really do want this to be an evergreen mechanic, and it might be kind of a flavor miss on other scenarios where like maybe you're in, if you're in Antarctica or something. Can you really say this like glacier is haunted? No, I mean I guess maybe.
most,
I think
I know
Haunted.
that it was a flavor like win in this, but
I mean, Haunted can be kind of more of a metaphorical thing. I think they could fudge it if they needed to.
you could also just redefine it. I mean, we do see in other scenarios where there's like just an effect on a location that's like, oh, if you fail a skill test here, something happens, or if you fail
right.
to succeed by 2 or whatever. It's not
It's
like
it's
that's
kind
in
of
other places.
it's like the name for like how hard it is to get clues off a location is Shroud. Like what does that mean, right? It's like whatever. It's just that's what the name is.
Yeah,
There. That's
yeah, that's true. So we mentioned a couple of these already, but like any scenario cards that really stick out in your mind, other than Meddlesome Familiar, which we talk about like every other podcast, from this campaign, either because like they have really dope art, or the mechanics are memorable, or whatever reason. Um, what sticks out in your minds?
Definitely a lot of good options. I think Fate of All Fools is one that really stands out, partly because the art is really badass, partly because it's a very I honestly don't know how I feel about it, the original version. Like on the one hand, I think it's kind of cool. On the other hand, it feels so punishing and so random in who gets the first one that sometimes I'm really frustrated by it. I guess if I draw it, then I think it's a really terribly designed card that should never have been printed. And if someone else draws it, I'm like, oh, look at this game design going on here. So um, no, I mean it's, but I think it is really cool. I think that we're not like officially talking about Return to yet, but this is a card that maybe because people complained about it, they kind of revised it for Return to, and they basically replaced it with a new version.
I'm
And
surprised, honestly.
yeah, and the new version is it kind of just feels like it doesn't really do anything. Like I guess
Yeah.
it's less spiky and it's less likely to just basically kill somebody very vindictively and randomly than the old version, but it's also kind of less interesting as a result. So I don't know. I have complicated feelings about it. Yeah, are there any other cards that we should mention that are really memorable?
I mean, there's a couple I like. I like Chaos Manifest because it's the coolest sounding one I think in this set.
Chaos Manifest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I also kind of like from Secret Name the strange geometry where you're like looking at some shapes and you get sucked inside the shapes or whatever.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think that's conceptually very funny. So
Oh, look at this coloring book over here. No, I'm inside it now. Like, yeah.
You have to like investigate in order to escape. I put a couple cards in here. I didn't go through the return to cards mostly because they're not on Card Game DB yet, as far as I know. So
Yeah, what's up with that?
and
I guess
on
if
Arkham DB, which is the database I use.
I mean, I guess if we are talking about return to cards, I definitely hate Vice and Villainy a lot.
I was just about to say.
It's just it's very annoying. It sometimes it's not going to do anything to you because you just have a couple of cheap cards in play that you can just lose to it. But man, it's just really annoying. Feels bad.
Yeah, I think the one scenario card that I really didn't like seeing, because it would happen at its strongest every single time, is the witch, the coven leader witch lady who
Oh yeah.
spawns at like 2/3/2, but for every witch in the discard pile, she gets stronger. And for whatever reason, every single time I've seen her come out, there's always at least 2 witches in the discard. So she's just this ridiculously hard to deal with lady, and she does 2 points of damage, I believe, which is like
Yeah.
if you roll into somebody who has like 9, that's fine for 1 hit, but still you're like, okay, this is getting rough. That was specifically for me one. I do really like the Court of the Great Old Ones. I'm glad that you put it on here, Ben, just because that like it's one where once you move into it, I think you have to like investigate. It forces you to investigate, and and the haunted ability is your next action must be investigate.
Yeah.
So if
it's
you're
something
somebody who
where-
is really bad int, you just you're forced to investigate for the rest of the turn, which was really thematically cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I put that on there because I like the art on it, and I also am a sucker for any type of like little Easter egg because like this is a location you can pop up and find, you know, in the last scenario when you're exploring around. So I'm always a sucker for that. I like the art on the Piper, because they're like it's just bagpipes that are like Cthulhu-y. And it's like, yeah, no one likes listening to the bagpipes. How can we make bagpipes worse? Oh, let's make it a Cthulhu. You know.
You don't like bagpipes, Ben?
No, they're
Everybody likes bagpipes.
I don't think that's true, Dan. I think they're
Pretty
notorious
sure it
for
is.
people not liking them for them being very loud and weird sounding. But you know,
Dane, how do you feel about bagpipes? Pro, con?
I'm pro bagpipe.
I think
but
they're pretty cool.
these
Alright,
specific
well,
bagpipes, though, the thing is that I guess minor spoilers for the end. This thing is supposed to be keeping Azathoth asleep, right? Bagpipes are not historically known to keep things asleep. They're mostly known for the opposite of that.
You don't put on a YouTube video that's like 8 hours of soothing bagpipe music when you're trying to fall asleep at night? Because I know I do.
Maybe it's just a difference in taste.
Yeah, I guess that's probably it. Oh, I'll just mention a couple of enemies. I love the spaghetti monsters from the final scenario, the space dancers.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though Dane humiliatingly was completely unable to do anything about them when we played RTTCU recently.
It's because I didn't take the hammer, Dan.
I guess so. Yeah, I don't know. I guess you have to have some kind of excuse, right? But I like those. I like the purple spaghetti monsters. I also like all the ghosts. There's a lot of cool ghost enemies that reappear in some of these scenarios, and they feel kind of spooky and kind of dangerous and kind of a different way from just like a big tentacle monster or something. So I like those.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think I made a slide for it, but like the Watcher is like a recurring enemy we see in a couple.
Oh yeah,
God, I
scenarios.
hate the Watcher.
The Watcher feels to me like a cooler fixed version of the Harbinger from TFA. Like I like it a lot better.
That is true. Yes, I will say that is definitely true. However, I still hate the Watcher because in every single scenario, there's sort of this pivot point, right? Like the agenda advances, and you know that's when the Watcher is going to come, and like everything is kind of like tense by that point. And then when the Watcher comes out, it's just an additional FU. It's just an additional like one more thing to deal with.
Not every scenario. I think like four, maybe 5 of them, ish.
A lot of scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's at least 4. I don't remember. But yeah, I like it as I agree that it's kind of a more interesting version of the Harbinger. That it kind of comes back out. You always have to deal with it. And it's like once it's on the board, it stays on the board. Like the Harbinger, you have to like figure out how to poof as fast as possible usually, or cut it around, which is its own fun little challenge. And I guess the Harbinger kind of scales with the number of players too, right? You need to like do a bunch of attacks on it to get rid of it. While in this one doesn't scale at all. I don't know if that's good or bad. I guess a multiplayer gives you more options because only one person has to deal with it. Like they have to go evade it or whatever. But
it never dies is the trade-off, right? And then there's also the encounter card that can completely heal it, and then it readies and engages somebody and hit smacks them, which is so annoying.
That one they hilariously in every scenario in Return to that card is available. They had to add to the Return to extra text that said, it doesn't exhaust after it makes this attack. just to make
that's funny. I never thought of that, because then it would just be exhausted the entire phase.
Right, because usually it's
for the entire round.
In the regular one, which it's like a weird rule that like I think not as many people are aware of until they like dig deep into the rules. Which like after an enemy attacks an enemy phase, it exhausts. And that one like makes it attack as if it were the enemy phase, so it should exhaust. And then they're like, "Oh no, we don't want that. That's too easy." So
that's so funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other cards that come to mind that you want to shout out right now?
I mean, I think the only thing, and we're going to get into it, is the Witch Hexes, which was like a big part. If you're not dealing with weird other things, you're dealing with the Witch's Hexes, and those are like a whole kind of game in their own right? Because there's 2 different ways you can deal with them. You can either evade a witch and then just use the action to get rid of them for an action, right? Or you can take the will test to get rid of them. And there's pros and cons to either. It depends on which investigators you brought. And I kind of appreciate that fact, where like if one of your stats isn't good, like if you're a rogue, for example, going into the Innsmouth, you can at least get rid of it with your super great agility. Unless you're, Tony or somebody like that, but don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like an interesting challenge. It's like, I have to either evade or will test to get rid of it. With the evasion one, though, it kind of makes the cost way higher. So, like, if you're a low willpower investigator, you don't have anyone to help you out, you have to spend an action to evade, unless you're like Finn or whatever, and then also an action to get rid of them, which makes them pretty punishing, I think, for encounter cards. Like 2 actions to get rid of them is pretty nasty.
Well, but another way to think about that is, unlike a lot of encounter cards, you do have 2 different ways to deal with them. Like a lot of encounter cards, it's just if you can't do a will test, something very bad is going to happen to you. With these, you can either do a will test or some type of like evasion test, right?
Yeah, and you can also like weigh like how bad the penalty on them is. Like if it's like if you actually need to get rid of it. Like if you get like punishment, for example, near the end of the game and you have a couple of hit points left, you might be like, I'm only gonna kill like 1 or 2 more enemies. Like I can take an extra damage or 2. It's fine. But some of them, it's like, if you get them early, it's like, I gotta get rid of this. I can't be sitting on like a -1 to my first test every round or whatever.
Bedeviled specifically, I think, was that right?
Yeah, Bedeviled's the one you can't trigger action abilities in your cards you control. So if you're like an asset heavy investigator, that's pretty bad. If you're like an event heavy investigator, like maybe Safina or someone, then maybe you don't care as much about Bedeviled. But
right.
I feel like these were replaced by a different set in Return to, I think.
They were. Yes, they were.
Like in Return to, the one that's really annoying is the one that makes playing cards cost 1 more, and you can end up with multiple copies of that, and you just feel like I'm completely boned.
Maligned, I think it was called.
Yeah, I think that's because these are like Bedeviled is quite bad for people that are using like weapons usually or spells like shriveling and
mystics
stuff.
And guardians, basically.
But for the most part, I feel like most of these you can just kind of play around. The Return to ones are harder to play around, and it is the thing that always bothered me is there's one scenario that has these cards in it, but there aren't really any witches, or there's like 1 witch that like you can't really do the evasion at all, and that feels kind of annoying.
I think it depends what path you're on. Like if you're like allied with the witches, then there's enemies.
Okay,
which can make these a little nastier. But if you're like allied with the Twilight Lodge, then there'll be witches. So
Yeah, I think these
Yeah.
were just made generally worse in the Return 2, because in the Return 2 there's also an amped up version of Racked, which is basically just every time you succeed a skill test during your turn, the next skill
Oh
test is
yeah.
done at -1. So it's kind of like Racked 2.0, which was just if you're taking like if you just are dealing with a really big enemy or something and you have to take multiple actions, then you have to sort of like make the decision to commit more later and stuff like that, and it's really just kind of brutal to deal with. But there are some investigators who are just taking one test, right? Like sometimes if you're Preston or somebody who's just scooping things up like auto, and then you might take one test at like 15 because you have well connected and you're rich, then you don't really care about it. So
Yeah, I think Despoiled, which is what you're talking about, makes you play around
yeah,
it a little differently because it's like, oh, I don't really want to take extra tests. But I mean, sometimes you're forced to. Actually, it's just during your turn, so it's not. It doesn't affect the mythos phase. So like,
right.
Right.
um, so you can kind of think about like, oh, I'll do this test normally, or I'll try to avoid doing a test until I can get rid of this or something. So, which I think has some play, but I think it's probably a little bit more punishing in lower player counts. So,
Yeah. I think the one that stood out to me that's not here is the one in the secret name, which is I can't remember the name of it, but it has really cool art, and it says if you haven't moved during your turn, you just take 2 horror at the end of your turn, which is really brutal. Because that definitely came up a couple of times for us when we were playing through with Trish and Roland, and we're like, oh, we have to like finagle a way for Roland to move once, which isn't too bad because he's got shortcuts and stuff, but still, it's like,
yeah, pulled by the stars.
yeah,
Which also does have very cool art on it. But
it really does.
yeah, so
Yeah.
so what other any other mechanics? So another set of encounter cards we didn't talk about, I don't think, is like there's sets of like 3 treacheries that like the first like time or two the first 2 you draw don't really do anything, and it's like when the third one you draw
Oh yeah.
something big
Mm.
and bad happens. Or like maybe you do a test to prevent it from like getting put next to the agenda, so you don't get 3 of them ramped up. Like the main one you see right away is like the demonic piping. Once you get 3 of those, the bagpipe monster comes out. But there's also like Terror in the Night. Just like do will tests, and the will tests become harder. Or no, sorry, that's the agility one. What's that? Inescapable Demise, the return to one.
Mm.
That
That's
one
like
is so brutal.
oh god, it's like it starts off like it's a kind of easy agility test, but every time you succeed,
2
it
agility
becomes
tests, I
worse.
think.
I
Yeah,
I can't believe we didn't mention that one because yeah, that is really brutal.
Both of the ones that scale like this. There's another one that has like depicts kind of cultists around an area, and it says like when you draw it, it's a peril, and you either take 1 damage and 1 horror, and it surges,
mm-hmm.
Oh,
or you put it next to the agenda deck or
that's
something
the
like that.
modified ancient evils. That's like
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
I
that
forget
one is
something
fine. Like
evils.
that's like the easiest version of ancient evils that they printed, I think.
Yeah, like the first 2 you just attach, and after that you just take the damage. um, and maybe you
Yeah,
ward one every time you cycle through the deck or something, so you just don't care. So that
The
one's
because
not
the
it's.
too
I mean,
bad.
effect is like super ancient evils though, right?
I mean,
Yeah,
Because
if it
it's
goes off, it's very bad. It advances the agenda.
and I mean
yeah,
it's very rough to take. Like taking 1-on-1 with no test to avoid it is kind of bad for a lot of characters. But by the time you have to do that, 2 of them are already attached, so there's only 1 in the entire deck. So it's not going to happen very often.
right,
Yeah,
right.
and they also you can
Um,
get milled and stuff by all the various mill effects.
right.
So
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do these kind of like ramp up the tension at all? Like when you have 2 of them up there, or is it kind of like just it makes the beginning of the game maybe easier or something? Or yes, don't have a strong opinion. I don't know.
I think that's what they're meant to do, but I don't know if they completely do it. For the most part, you can just completely ignore them. It's like the first 2 are just a surge, so they're just kind of like a thing that. Well, I guess Terror in the Night you do, and Ultimate Chaos you do get a test for them.
Yes.
So, but it's fine. I don't know. I think these are fine. I don't think they're incredibly interesting or bad. They're just okay.
I forgot
Yeah.
Ultimate Chaos. Ultimate Chaos has that very cool art on the playmat Dan constantly tries to
Yes.
search eBay for.
I mean, on the power ranking of playmats that I whine about not having, the Santa playmat is definitely number 1, but this is like probably number 2.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Ultimate
that's a
Chaos
playmat.
Ultimate Chaos and like Terror in the Night kind of do something specific in that while demonic piping just always happens because there's no test, you just throw it again next to the agenda deck and then it surges. Ultimate Chaos, I remember it being particularly annoying for us as Trish and Roland because the will test is hard, and if you fail by 3 or more, it gains surge and it can't be canceled, which means you just can't cancel it. Period. Like you can't cancel whatever the next card is.
You
Um,
Well, no, the card that gains Surge can't be canceled. It's Ultimate Chaos that can't be canceled, and it can't be canceled twice.
Right.
They wrote it on there twice. So,
and the attack from Azathoth can't be canceled from it.
right,
Right.
I really don't like that. Like,
Well,
if you have a
Azaroth-
dodge in your deck, you should be able to use it.
yeah, you can't cancel attacks from Azoth at all, I believe. And I feel like I flip flopped on this a few times, but I'm pretty sure what the settled on, you can't like play dodge because that's like a card effect or something. So, but yeah, Azoth is pretty nasty in there. So, you know. There was one other set of mechanics I didn't make a slide for, which I guess is like the encounter deck discard mechanics. Like we talked about Vice and Villainy, but it's like there's effects that like trigger every time the encounter deck goes off, and there's other encounter cards that are like, do a test, and for every point you fail by, you discard some cards. So it accelerates,
that's right.
It accelerates how fast the deck goes out. Do you guys think that
think
has a
that-
major impact on the game, or is it kind of like it happens once a game maybe?
I wouldn't say it's a major impact. I think it does help to give the witches kind of a gameplay mechanic identity, which is neat. So I like that about it. It's kind of one more thing that you have to remember to do a lot of times, which is a little annoying, but I think it's cool overall.
Yeah, and
Those are the ones that when the agenda deck.
Yeah, like when the
goes-
agenda comes out, you like do a test or like something.
Yeah.
Take damage. or
Combined
something.
with a lot of cards that cause you to mill cards off the encounter deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in hard mode, isn't there several scenarios where the tokens just like make you mill cards, so like those effects fire off?
Yes.
One of the
frequently?
tokens is just like it's like -2, but then you also mill cards equal to the difficulty of the test. Like even if you pass, it's not like the amount you fail by. So
That
you
was in
do
the
some
first one,
tests.
yeah.
Yeah, you can just mill like 5 cards sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes those cards a little bit scarier, I guess, or do you just I don't know. I guess it makes them more likely to fire off.
Yeah.
Especially
I think it
Vice
also
and
works
Villainy.
pretty well with one of the types of cards, which was like it introduces a really high skill test that you're not meant to succeed. You're just meant to like not fail by a lot, which is kind of neat because like I think up until this point we've mostly seen like some hard skill tests, mostly kind of manageable, but this one is just like there's an agility 5 skill test, or like Centuries of Secrets, I believe, is a will test that's 5, and you're not meant to succeed it. You're mostly just meant to fail it, but not by a lot, and then it mills cards for you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I don't know. It's an interesting mechanic that we see across the witches, which kind of gives them an identity because it is like a thing. It's like, oh, we're running out of time because it's gonna all these effects are gonna fire off. It's different than like the cultists, because cultists have like their doom mechanic, which I think we mostly see the two mechanic similar to how we've seen it in like the base sets. But so one other mechanic that we kind of see, like we see this in every campaign where they try to come up with a unique way to like add the various spooky tokens to the bag, like the cultist, the tablet, the elder things. In this one, it's I think you get cultists whenever you side with the Silo Twilight Lodge, so you can kind of control that. But at the very beginning of the campaign, you have to pick like to accept your fate or reject it, and that determines if you have tablets or elder things in the bag the whole campaign. I don't know if Dan ever cares about this, but I think Dane likes how it ties into the story usually. Do you think this is like a good way to implement this, or is it kind of like a fire and forget? Like, do you ever regret like in scenario 5, like, oh man, I wish I had picked got the elder things instead of tablets this time, or is it kind of like, whatever?
I like how different it is because going back to playing other scenarios, for example, Carcosa, I think that what used to be something that I really enjoyed doing was something that actually just kind of got really annoying because Carcosa is specifically like almost every scenario. If it like, okay, depending on how much conviction / doubt you have, it's like pull out the tokens that you have from the bag and then put in these tokens. And in Forgotten Age,
Well, in Carcosa, it's like based on what most of them I think is like a decision you make during the scenario.
yeah.
Determines what symbols you get, but sometimes it might be hard to remember like, oh, this decision gives me the symbols or whatever. And then Forgotten Age, it's just based on if you side with Alejandro or Ishtaka or neither, right?
Yeah, and I think that like for me, Carcosa was like kind of like bordering on obnoxious, where you're almost every scenario you're changing chaos tokens out and putting new ones in. TFA kind of got it right in that sense, where like it's very straightforward once you know. And in this, it's almost the exact opposite of Carcosa, where it's like depending on one decision that you make at the beginning of the game, or the beginning campaign, you either put in one or the other, then you just forget about it. And then as you go along with like the Silver Twilight Lodge, you might be adding more cultists in depending on the decisions that you make, which feels nice to me. It feels like the least amount of management in that sense. And no, I do like adding tokens to the bag. I think sometimes it adds just like, here's a random 4. Because I hate you. That's why is sort of how like go.
I don't think we've seen like here's a random -4 or -5 or whatever since like Carcosa, have we?
This one does it in Union Dissolution. I believe that it just adds a random one. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't remember. I've seen ones where like we add a specific spooky token depending on decisions. I think, but yeah. The ones that I think that's just supposed to make the campaign feel like it gets harder a little bit if the bag gets a little spookier. But I like it when it's more feels like it's based on decisions or resolutions rather than just like, oh, you're at scenario 6. Here's the bag's a little harder now, so it feels a little more thematic, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have been weird to include these as like, the binary path between either doing cultists or the Silver Twilight Lodge versus the witches, because like the tokens don't really represent that. The cultists very much represent, the living, breathing people that you're interacting with. Whereas like the elder things and the tablets are more sort of ambiguous and maybe a little esoteric in that you just don't really know what you're going for sometimes. Whereas like, and I think that they did a good job with that.
Yeah. No, yeah, I kind of like it. I feel like it's better on replays because you kind of like understand how important that first decision is. And when you do it blind, it's just like, what's my character feel like doing or whatever. So I don't know, it can make it interesting. I haven't actually gone through and like looked at mechanically like, oh, if tablets or squids are better overall throughout the campaign. So I don't know how well balanced that is. But it could be cool to look at that. Like if you're trying to do expert or whatever, that's probably like pretty important which one you decide. So how about let's talk about return to. So we got these return to boxes for each campaign so far. Generally, I think they feel like they make the campaign, they try to fix some. It's like a patch for the campaign in a lot of the cases where they'll fix some stuff, but also like introduces a little bit more randomness a lot of time. Sometimes it adds new mechanics. So for Return to, I know you guys played it on stream. I think Dan and I played it in person last month in a marathon with Colin, and I played it with friends. What do you guys think about Return to? Does it make the campaign better or worse overall?
I think Dan has a lot to say about this.
Well, I mean, I don't know. So I wouldn't say that it makes it worse for the most part, but to me, it does feel different from the previous Return Tos, which were, pretty straightforward upgrades that just generally made things better. Like, Return to Dunwich is basically necessary to make Dunwich interesting at all, and Return to Carcosa was quite good. It added some interesting encounter cards. It was fun. Forgotten Age fixed some stuff we didn't like about Forgotten Age. Circle Undone, I kind of think it was just already quite good before the Return to, and I don't really feel like the Return to added very much. Like we've already discussed, it basically swapped out some encounter cards for alternate ones that aren't really more interesting. They're just kind of different. And in some cases, I think were arguably less interesting. And as we're going to maybe discuss later, I don't think it really did a whole lot in terms of making scenarios play differently. Like it didn't really change how any of the scenarios work on a fundamental level, except maybe Wages of Sin, which is a scenario I like a lot. And I think I think Return to Wages of Sin had some changes that kind of annoyed me a little bit. Like it has this alternate win condition you can go for, but you kind of have to commit to that right at the beginning, which sort of gets in the way of the push your luck, how many of the heretics can you get challenge. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think overall less impactful than the earlier Return Tos, and in particular, I was annoyed by what they did in Wages of Sin.
Yeah, I think like the scenario that people more universally were frustrated with is the final scenario in this campaign, because there's a big randomness element. Because the map is very big, it's kind of hard to move around the map, and like the third stage of the map, there's like 4 locations you need to find the right one. If you pick the wrong one a couple times in a row, you'll run out of doom, and Azeroth will smack you a bunch.
And when Dane and I played it on Twitch a few weeks ago, we just miraculously got the correct location every time, so it was no problem at all for us.
It was perfect, planned.
I think all the times I've won it, which I think I've won it most of the time, I did get lucky and like find it in the the lower half of the cards, like either the first or second one for each phase, and that's very good. And the ones where I lost, it was like, oh yeah, it was the third one or the fourth one, and we were
Yeah.
So I was expecting Return to kind of improve on that a little bit, because that's usually like they find whatever scenario people have biggest issue with and fix it. I don't know if it really did. It gives you like the option to get the night gaunts if you have enough
Oh yeah.
paths. Spooky
It's like a whole bunch of
points.
stuff that
What
like all the trinkets that you're collecting
Yeah.
matter, and like
Uh,
decisions that you've made
like there's
if
the
you've talked to the
the
Silver
Twist
Twilight
of
Lodge
Fate
and stuff.
interlude gives you points. I forget what they're exactly called. Maybe they're just called tally marks. I don't remember. But if you have enough of them, you can get the night gaunts to fly around. And I did like the night gaunt mechanic, which I don't think you guys got to do, but it kind of gives you like a mount that you can use to fly through the empty space, and like takes damage every time you do that. So you have like limited uses on it. So you can kind of think about when you strategically want to use it to like move across the map kind of fast. So I like that. But other than that, I agree with you guys. There aren't really major changes. There's the addition of the witch focus path, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, otherwise it's kind of just like the encounter cards are a little bit different or harder. Sometimes a little bit harder, sometimes just a little bit different. So I don't know if they did a good job of like quote unquote fixing anything that needed to be fixed. I'd be interested to hear from people that like didn't like the original playthrough of the Circle Undone, and if this Return to changed their minds on it at all, either or people that did like it and thought it was worse. So I don't know.
Yeah. I think that the one thing that, kind of an aside anyway, the one thing that I didn't like too much about both the last scenario and the fourth scenario were that it's very luck based. It's very random, like very RNG, in that if the heretics happen to be in the right place, then you have an incredibly easy time. I don't know what the percentages are for that to happen, but I've heard from people who are just like, where we consider generally that to be one of the hardest scenarios maybe ever made, to like get 100% on. I know that the intent is not that, but I've heard just some people say, "Oh, all the heretics spawned all at the right places, and it was super easy." And like
Yeah.
that was our experience in the last scenario when Dan and I played through it, and it's definitely not supposed to be that. You're definitely supposed to go through a couple first, but
Yeah.
variance just kind of makes it a little trivial, and like for an end scenario, that felt like maybe a miss for me.
Yeah, I mean, for Wages of Sin, I think most of the time you have to get very, very lucky to have like the ghosts in the correct place every time.
Right.
And especially with Return to it because it adds a couple more ghosts, it makes it even harder. But yeah, the Wages of Sin, I like the puzzle aspect where you like have to look at each one, figure out where location you have to go, and figure out how to get over there efficiently. And yeah, I kind of agree with Dan a little bit that the new objective takes away from that a little bit. So, but the thing is, these new objectives you can just completely ignore. Like
Right.
it's only if you want to like get the new story text or whatever. Which
Yeah.
which I think people do play this game to experience different story paths.
Yes.
At least I do. I don't think Dan
That-
does, but
That can't be right. That doesn't sound right.
Um,
No, I mean, I think like yeah. To boil it all down to like the biggest issue, it's just that previous Return twos I feel like have really upgraded the encounter deck and made it a lot more interesting. And in Circle Undone, I think the encounter deck was already very good and very interesting and very fun to deal with. And the Return to just kind of made it a little bit more annoying and didn't really change much else. So I think that's my main criticism of it. Is just that there wasn't a lot that needed fixing about the encounter cards, and that's the biggest thing that we've seen in previous Return twos.
Yeah. I think maybe Dan, you're speaking more mechanically and how it pertains to like playing through, but there are a lot of changes that I really, really love that Return 2 did. For example, the tarot cards and that entire mechanic
Tarot
where
cards are great. Yeah, those
it
are
adds
neat.
like a whole layer, a whole new layer. Fantastic art, and you get now you can do it. It's just such an upgrade. Like it's such an upgrade to have because you can include these tarot cards in any other scenario. You can, and there's new like player cards that kind of revolve around like observed. But the other things that it changes are that like I think for me anyways, I really appreciated what they did with Return to, because rather than upgrading and fixing like Carcosa did, and it did very well, this more, for me, almost felt like an entirely new uh, a new campaign, because all the skill tests were changed. Like, whereas will used to be the big thing, it's still a big thing, but now agility was really big, because and it kind of gave more stuff to do for rogues, because you have like these really high agility tests, and things like, you know, dodging the witches was even more important because the hexes were worse. So like it kind of almost introduced an entirely different scenario to me. And in addition, I guess the last thing that I'd want to say about it is that all of the different story beats that it included for me were a big hit, because in the beginning, when you choose to accept your fate or not, it's very binary in that you basically almost never want to do the first thing, because it adds 2 weaknesses to your deck. And yes, the Ace of Rods is a weakness. And instead, it adds a different thing that you can do instead of that, which is to play with a specific tarot setup for the campaign, which was really big win for me. And in addition, it added more story where you get to interact with the witches a little bit more, instead of them just being like these random witches who you're sympathetic for because you want to, you know, yell at the lodge and murder them all. So it, and then eventually, I think, as Lord Bad Boy's alluding to in the chat, it adds another win con. Or end of the campaign, which we didn't get to do, but
Well, let's
adds another ally.
Yeah, we have a question about that, right?
Yeah, I agree. I love the tarot cards, and I'm excited to use those in the future campaigns. So that is a great include. I'm glad that got in there. But yeah, otherwise, I kind of agree with how you guys have been saying. It mostly doesn't change too much. But yeah, let's talk about the Lodge versus the Coven. So the original campaign, you kind of like make choices throughout the campaign, whether you want to like give information to the lodge about the witches, or like kind of hang out with the witches more. In the original campaign, there was like a big reward for like being loyal to the lodge. Well, maybe everyone doesn't think it's a reward, but there's a big major story beat where you can win the campaign in a different way if you sided with the lodge. But there wasn't really like a big reward for siding with the witches. So kind of the thing that Return to fixed, I guess, is they give you an option where you can pursue new objectives to kind of like more hard ally with the witches, so you can get a new win condition for the campaign for siding with them. What do you guys think of like these two different paths? Is it cool and does like this new one in the Return to strengthen the campaign? Is it worth getting added in? I think for me, like I always like different story paths. I like interesting things. I don't know if the payoff for really either like staying loyal to either of these paths, the payoff is you kind of win the campaign early, and like, that's cool. But usually I want to play the whole campaign.
Yeah, that's the thing. A campaign resolution that just cuts off the last couple scenarios, to me, doesn't really count as like a real ending. In the sense that you're probably not going to go for that one unless you just run out of time, or something unusual happens. So yeah, that's a little bit of a disappointment to me. They added a new path, which normally would be a great reason to go back and replay the campaign if it made the scenarios play differently, if it made give you new experience. But in this case, the main scenarios that are altered are Wages of Sin, which I already complained about earlier, and
the first scenario.
Yeah, a little bit, but it's basically like, yeah, you do a different version of Wages of Sin, which I don't really like as much, and then you get to finish the campaign early, which is not that much of a reward, I don't think. So I was a little bit disappointed that was how that worked out.
Yeah, in my playthrough with one of my groups of friends I play with a lot, when we played Circle Undone blind, I always let them make the choices because I've already played it, and they hard wait into the Twilight Lodge, and you win at the end of scenario 5 if you hard go to Twilight Lodge, and we're like, we should probably just keep going. Let's do a little time warp and not make that last decision. So I don't know if that's common amongst other players. I think there was a poll recently on Twitter from MJ. It was like, oh, if you guys get an auto lose in the mid campaign, do you keep going or not? And I bet you could ask the same questions if you got a win in the middle of the campaign. Do you keep going or not? Because yeah, usually you want to play the whole scenarios, unless those like last scenarios are bad, but that's like a whole other problem, right? So, um, but you know, I think I did like the addition of like balancing it out in return to that. Like you at least have the option to like get a reward for the witches. When Dan and I played it with Colin, we ended up getting that reward, and because we were kind of short on time to finish the campaign, we did stick with it. But it meant that you know that we didn't get to do the return twos for the other two or not. So um, the other reward for the witches is you do get Erin as like an
Yes.
ally, and she's pretty cool because she is like she basically has like a ward effect against some not all the cards, but some of the cards in the counter deck, which is kind of fun. So it's you know it's I like it when we get allies that are like tied to the story and have some kind of thematic benefit. Like she wouldn't be as strong like if you carried her into another campaign, which is fine. I don't ever do the what is it called? What do people call it? Intrepid investigators, where you keep going. So
Oh yeah. Campaign to campaign.
um,
No, I like her a lot. I think that the inclusion of that was maybe like kind of a nod to the fact that you don't get the other investigators from the prologue until like scenario 6, and then you're done with them in two scenarios anyway. But so I like that they included the option to get this earlier, because I think you can get her as early as the end of scenario 4, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken.
you get
I
her
know
in
she
Witches of
appears in
Sin.
scenario 4.
Yeah, you get her at the end of Witches of Sin if you complete her optional objective.
Yeah,
Complete
yeah.
objective. But you don't have the option to get her if you fail the objective in scenario 1. Like if you don't do that, the new
Right.
optional one. Like you always have to do the optional objective to keep going on the witch path, which is fine.
Right.
I mean, but other than like the major like end of campaign hard loyalty ends, there are other influences, right? Like as we mentioned, depending who you side with at the end of Union and Disillusion, you get kind of a different theme to the encounter cards in the Clutches of Chaos. Like you get the witches or the cultists. You get like a slightly different boss, which is the ones I put up on here. Do you think those
Right.
have noticeable impacts? I feel like I guess it's hard for me because I think most of the time I always side with the witches, so I don't know if I have as much experience with like the siding with the Twilight Lodge aspects, but I don't know. Does any of that impact you guys at all?
They don't feel too different for me. I've played with both of them as the enemy, like kind of culminating at Clutches of Chaos, and they both kind of have that thing where for each clue you have, they get minus health.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when Dan and I were playing and MUR plays, it kind of was just sort of anticlimactic. When they came out, we were like, oh, you know, we have to deal with her. I don't know if we're gonna be able to deal with her because you know Roland's got X amount of damage and horror on him already, and like I'd have to shoot her 3 times, and she has like 5 combat, and that's really hard to deal with. And then Dan was like, oh wait, we could just get clues, and then Dan got like 8 clues, and then I shot her once, and she was dead. And that was the exact experience for me for Carl, because I think I was playing Mark, and Mark just makes everything really easy, but also like we had some really good person who was grabbing clues, some seeker. So like it was just really easy to blast down his life, and then Mark was just able to murder him in like 3 or 4 shots, which
Bing bang.
made it kind of trivial. So they both end up feeling kind of very similar, even though they're kind of teched to be different, right? Like one has alert, one has a hunt or retaliate, and the other one does something specific with breaches, and then the other one like makes people take damage and horror if breaches are placed on their location. So they do like different things minorly, but are largely the kind of the same boss.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for In Clutches of Chaos, the bosses aren't too different. I guess if you have the cultists like against you, that means you get like extra things that spawn doom on the board,
Mhm.
which I think maybe could make that scenario a little bit tougher because the
Yeah.
doom threshold is so low and you have not too much room for error. Um, at the same time, though, if you're like don't have any incursions that have gone off yet, you can sort of ignore them more easily.
Yeah.
So there might be like a big. Usually, I have like a one point in the scenario where like we can't avoid an incursion, and suddenly you go from like 0 to doom to like 4, and then it becomes
Right.
a lot more tense. So at that point, they might matter more. I mean, the other scenario that's like pretty different depending whose side you're on is for the greater good, right? Because it's either you have
Yes.
to like evade the enemies to get rid of the doom, or like parley with them,
Right.
Right.
which I think makes you tackle those enemies differently depending which playthrough it is, which it does feel a lot different. And
Yeah.
in your investigators, you might be like, oh, we kind of want to do the agility one, so let's sign with the witches or whatever. So
Yeah, it's similar to like Phantom of Truth, where like I think most campaigns have one scenario that has two significantly different versions based on choices. And if not, they definitely should. Like I always like
Yeah.
to see that in a campaign.
Yeah, I think that the one thing, as Dan was kind of talking about earlier, it also does happen in Unit Disillusion, where kind of at the end you either get the cultists who spawn as the generic core set cultists, or you get the cultists who spawn as like the Carl Sanford Lodge spooky cultists that you can parlay with. But that just feels like such an afterthought when you already have done for the greater good, where that's the entire shtick. The entire shtick is that like the whole of the lodge changes depending on if you've sided with them or not. So it's kind of like, okay, it's doing this thing again, but I already went through this really fun scenario where this is the entire point of it. So I think for me, maybe Clutches of Chaos, the difference between the two is a little bit more of a miss, even though you get different enemies and things like that, than for the greater good. For the greater good, I think was the best scenario that used that kind of swapped and did that.
do you guys think there should have been a scenario that was like you had to infiltrate the witches' hideout or whatever, or do something with the witches that, depending if you're allies with them or not, it played out differently, or do you think like you only really need one of those that get paid?
I would like that a lot.
Yeah,
I would have liked it.
I would have liked to see more if they could come up with an interesting way to do it. But you know, it's fine.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the major critique the first time around was that like, well, we don't really get to see a lot of the witches, and maybe that's more of the reason why Aaron was also introduced. And Karma Sim and Chad also bringing up the fact that after Unit Disillusion, I think you get a lot of flavor text about like how the witches are dealing with Annette as she's changing into the horrible evil abomination ghost thing. So there was a lot more of an effort for you to connect with the witches in that way, which I appreciated. But I also just wanted to see more cool witch stuff, which we don't really get a huge like a full scenario to kind of expand on. So
Yeah, I mean the thing with the Aaron path is like the story text is like she's like kind of unsure of like the witches.
yeah,
It kind of would have been cool if there was also like a cultist guy that's like, I guess Diana exists, so maybe maybe you already have that as an investigator. But you know, having someone that's like, you know, I'm not totally drinking the Kool-Aid here. um, like that's kind of interesting from a story beat perspective. And it could have been cool if they enhanced the cultist path a little bit more, where like you know maybe there's some cultist that gives you a agility bonus or something that can help end up teaming up with you. And give you a little bit more insight into the coven, but or not the coven, the lodge. But so let's talk about the real meat and potatoes here. Now that the campaign's been out for a couple of years, we played it many times between all of us. What do we think the best scenario is in all of Circle Undone, either the Return to version or the regular version? What's you guys' favorite?
oof. Well, I think Dan, you're kind of a huge proponent of the Wages of Sin, right?
I do like Wages of Sin quite a bit. That would probably be my pick, although I like For the Greater Good a lot too. I even like Before the Black Throne actually quite a bit too. But yeah, I guess I would probably pick Wages of Sin.
Yeah, for me, I think Wages of Sin is definitely like mechanically the most interesting one. I think for us because of the challenge. I do like and I like Clutches of Chaos because it has like a different like puzzle you have to
That one's
solve.
great too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The one that usually comes to mind the most, even though mechanically I guess it's kind of weaker, is the secret name. Mostly because of
Really?
the stupid rat card is so memorable. But
It's so good.
But you know, I like the exploring the weird dimension stuff. Like you're wandering through a spooky house, and each door you open is like a different world. I like the theme of that. But yeah, and then like For the Good is fine. Death's Doorstep is fine. You know, I guess Death's Doorstep is actually, or is that the name of the second scenario?
It's the second one, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like that one also is like plays a little different depending if you want to side with the lodge or not. Because if you want to side with the lodge, you like try to protect everybody, right?
That's right. And you talk with what's his name? Can't remember his name.
Not HP Lovecraft.
Yeah, yeah.
So that makes that one a little more interesting. But if you're siding with the witches, you kind of just let them all die. That scenario is very easy, so it's not very interesting if you're doing the witch side, which I think
Yeah.
fails a little bit more. Where for the greater good, depending either path is interesting. So I think that's why that's a stronger scenario.
Yeah. Or if you're like Dan and I, Roland takes fine clothes to talk with him easier, and then you draw an autofail on the turns that you're trying to talk with him, and he's not talking with you. So then you just shoot him in the face, and everything is very easy.
It's probably because Roland like had his notebook out, even though he was wearing the fine clothes, and it was really obvious he was a cop. He had his fedora on still with the badge on it, so like that's just you probably should have had somebody else talk to him. You know,
Yeah.
He's probably like, oh no, I'm not a cop. You know, that thing about cops having to tell you if they're cops, if you ask, that's actually not true. And I know that because and he pulls out his handbook for how to lie. No comment, you know. So, but yeah. But so Dane, what's your favorite then? What's your favorite scenario?
It's really tough because I really love For the Greater Good a lot, mostly because of our all Guardian run through it and abusing the fact that we had like 6 to 8 handcuffs and handcuffing every single cultist was ridiculous. But so that one has a special place in my heart. I think I love the Wages of Sin, and a little bit about the Wages of Sin that I'm kind of thinking about now in terms of like ranking it anywhere is that Wages of Sin is the perfect difficulty in that it is the absolute hardest scenario without it being groan worthy, which is kind of like what the Forgotten Age, our issue with the Forgotten Age is. Any more difficult than it would have just been that. But it's kind of like hits that perfect point where it's like, okay, as long as we get lucky with maybe one of these, there's a chance that we can do it. So like there's always like there's a really really good mechanical feel to that entire scenario. The map is really perfect. Like when the Watcher comes out, it's kind of a perfect timing because you're just starting to get a handle on everything, and then the Watcher comes out and it's just miserable again. But honestly, I really enjoy the first one quite a bit because it has that scenario, the mechanic that's only introduced again or reintroduced again in United's Delusion, where all the locations are in front of each investigator and you can't touch anybody else. Like everybody's separated. And that led to some weird rules things, I remember, where like it's sometimes impossible for you to advance and then you just die. But I like that mechanic.
The initial pretty, I think it was possible you could get not enough clues in certain player accounts, depending which random ones you got. But they added that. They fixed it. You know, sometimes that happens. But you're actually completely wrong about the Witching Hour. That scenario is very bad. You know why it's bad? Because it's impossible to arrange the locations in a way that you can understand what's connected to what visually.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Like, because
before the Witch's Circle comes out, they're all like connected in some way.
And even then, there's like the witches, the Witchwood locations are like all connected to each other in like the center area, but they're not all connected to the Arkham Woods. And the Arkham Woods are connected to each other, but only connected to a certain Witching Out or Witches Wood locations or something like that. Every time I try to make a map and I try to connect everything, and it always looks like a gross mess. So, you know, I guess that's my fault for trying to like connect the locations visually instead of just looking at the symbols. But no, I don't like that. It frustrates me.
No, I think that it's one of my favorite scenario ones of any of the campaigns because it does such a good job at like kind of setting the tone. Because you're in these woods, you don't know what just happened, and there's witches around you, there's people casting spells, there's all weird things happening with the discard pile. I think it just kind of strikes the perfect tone to kind of enter into the rest of the campaign. And honestly, I would have loved to, now that more people are talking about it, and by more people I mean us and the folks in chat, I would have loved to have seen like the witch camp and like go into the woods a little more and have that more like gothic horror vibe be touched in a way that we kind of really didn't get, other than in this one and in the Wages of Sin, because that's in a graveyard, right? So like I like the outdoors ones mostly, except for the Greater Good, where you can just be, you know, police and handcuff everything. So yeah.
Yeah, but while we're talking about the scenarios we didn't like as much, anyone that are big flops for you guys in this, or do you kind of like all of them, at least at
the last one
level?
Before the Blackthorn, hands down.
That's the most metal scenario, Dane. That's like the That's that's like the Mastodon soundtrack scenario, right, or whatever. Like
It would be good. I think every part of that scenario is totally fine, except for the fact that they didn't want to print cards for empty space, so somebody has to use the cards from their deck. It's so bad.
we've hit the center bingo space, which is like Dane picks one particular thing that drives him absolutely insane.
It really is. It really is. It's so
Well,
bad. They don't even need it.
Ben hates
Yeah.
it too. Interesting.
It's so bad. They don't even need it. The Mythos Busters released these really cool empty space tokens, and MJ herself said the only reason why they didn't use like things like that was because they couldn't really print anymore, or they couldn't like print specific cards for this thing. So it's totally fine if you use those. And now I'm going to use those every single time because I hate like all the things I just spent experience on. They're going to be out there. You know it. It's the same reason like when you get double, that shit's at the bottom of your deck every single goddamn game.
This is a problem with a very easy solution, which is every time someone starts talking about making story decisions or who should be the lead investigator, just roll your eyes and make fart noises, and you'll never be the lead investigator. It works great for a friend of mine. It works virtually all the time, and he never has to be lead investigator ever. His cards never get turned in empty space. This is a problem. This is a solved problem.
Yeah. The mechanic is kind of finicky, especially if like different people have to pull out cards, which can happen. Like
It's so
that's not great.
I mean, it's definitely bad and awkward. Do you feel the same way about swarms though, Dane? Sorry to interrupt you, Ben. I'm just curious.
Well, swarms are fine because you can kill them and then just get your cards back. Yeah, sometimes it sucks because they go to your discard pile, but some people don't mind, right? Like Yorick doesn't mind.
Yeah, it is similar to swarms. It is kind of awkward. I guess I always just kind of the reason I don't like to use a substitute because I just assumed that like all the playtesting and balancing was somehow done around this. But if
the massive amount of playtesting that was done about this specific issue.
Yeah, I mean, if that's just blatantly a bad assumption, then I guess I might be okay with just using the cards that those players gave us. So to use as substitutes, because I'm always hesitant to like do some type of house rule because I assume that it was balanced around whatever mechanic people don't like.
I guess it's because like the way that you would have known is that like sometimes empty space can become flipped. Oh, and then you take horror depending on whose card it is. Oh no, like if they did anything like that where empty space becomes like it's a fragment of your memory, and oh no, Roland's going insane or whatever, like that would be something. But you literally don't interact with them beyond like moving on them or moving the locations all across them. So like there's literally no mechanical benefit to doing that, and if anything, it's just a deficit that feels bad because it takes your cards.
I think the best strategy is to just take your copies of Sled Dogs and just use those as the empty space. Just put those in the Circle Undone box and just set them aside. There's 4 of them, so you only need like 2 copies of Edge of the Earth. In terms of flops, this is maybe going to be unpopular because I think there are people in the chat talking about how much they like it, but the secret name doesn't really work too well for me. I mean, it's the fact that there's only rats that keep getting bigger. There's not any more interesting enemies. Just the structure of it doesn't. There's not a lot. We've talked a lot about how mechanically interesting a lot of these scenarios are, and the secret name just kind of isn't. So that one doesn't totally work for me. And I would also say Union and Disillusion, I mentioned earlier, just not a lot going on. It's fine. It's it's not a bad scenario. It's just most of the ones in this campaign I really, really like. So those 2 are the ones that are just kind of like, yeah, they're all right.
Do you think Return to change that opinion at all, or not really?
No. Didn't really change anything about those scenarios, which was one reason why I was disappointed in it.
I mean, what about you loved Wages of Sin? Does the Return to Wages of Sin, if you're going for that extra thing, make it drop out of your favorite, Dan, or is it still your favorite even in Return to?
I mean, I've now done Return to Wages of Sin twice, and both times I was playing with weirdos that really wanted to try to get the new story path for some insane reason, and I indulged this perverse desire, right? Because whatever, it's a new campaign, you got to make accommodations for people with weird hang-ups going on. That's over now. From now on, we do Wages of Sin, Return to, not Return to. I don't care. We're going for 4 heretics because that's real gaming. Okay, that's real.
That's real gaming.
That's what Arkham Horror, the card game, is all about, is getting all 4 heretics. So Answer to your question, no, I don't care because we're just never going to try to do that again.
Part of the meticulous balance of the Wages of Sin was around getting the 4 heretics.
Yeah,
And like
oh,
the
yeah.
fact that they alter that in that specific scenario feels like a miss to me too, because like they could have done that on the 3rd scenario, or they could have done it on the 5th scenario, where there's
Yeah.
not as much going on,
I-
and it's not as much of a pivot.
I think they even could have set it up so that the kind of different way that you complete the scenario, the different goal, is more aligned with or compatible with trying to get all 4. I think they could have
Yes.
they could have figured out some way to make it so that the two don't like clash with each other, and it really annoys me that they didn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way they did it in the first scenario, you have to like evade everything instead of kill or get all the clues, right? So it's like, oh,
That's right, yeah.
That's the 3rd way to
Yeah,
deal with stuff.
yeah.
Or handcuff stuff. Handcuffs MVP, man.
I mean, because like I know I'm like really going overboard with like complaining about Wages of Sin, but that's legit like a top 5 scenario in the whole game for me. Like I really like it, and it feels like they kind of screwed it up in a really unnecessary way for Return to. So I am very annoyed by that. But I mean, I still like, you know, I wouldn't tell people like don't buy Return to Circle Undone. Like there's still cool stuff in it. It still will give you a different experience if you play it. So it's still fine. This feels like a real like own goal that they kind of screwed up one of my favorite scenarios for basically no reason.
Yeah, and I guess Conrad in chat is saying, sorry, Bad Boy in chat is saying that we didn't really mention anything about it at Death's Doorstep. I think it's because that scenario is like mostly pretty benign. Like nothing super huge happens. It's cool. Like I like how it, you know, all the location slips and it gets really spooky. I actually love that scenario in the Return to specifically because there's a lot of new cards, like the one that adds a shroud and kind of like moves around. It kind of makes you think about where you're leaving some clues and where, you know, you can kind of like get them off of the place that has victory on it so that you can move in there and get the victory. There's a lot. I think there's a lot more cooler dynamics that are happening in that in the Return to. There's also
they added Senator Rutherford Delano Hoover, whatever the hell his name is, you know.
There's that senator guy that's at the beginning, and there's also like a guy that's just like a clearly evil jerk. That's the character that pops out that like adds doom or whatever.
Oh, that's right.
Which is just kind of fun. I mean, Death's Doorstep, I didn't talk about it too much because it introduces like the flipping of the locations being swapped out, which I guess is maybe a little bit finicky when you do it, but it is cool. It's like, oh, you're in the mansion, then oh no, you're sucked into the mist, and now everything's spooky and you gotta get out. But as I said, I think it kind of whiffs if you're doing like the witch's path and you just say, I don't really care if all the guys die. I think the challenge comes from if you're like trying to save everybody there. And if you're not trying to do that, it's just kind of a dud. So I mean, obviously,
it's much harder.
Yeah, like you obviously could just decide like every time you play the campaign, oh, let's go for the harder difficulty. But there's also like I don't think there's like a bigger reward really, other than that you get to go on the cultist path, which you could win.
I think you get more experience too if you get a MP Hatecraft.
I don't think so. I think if he dies or if he's in the victory, I think you get or he's tucked or whatever. I think you get 2 experience either way.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think for me the worst scenario, I think it's Union Dissolution, just because we mentioned already. But I like the theme of the birds. You know, birds are spooky. It's cool, but mechanically it's usually feels pretty easy. Like it's not challenging enough, I think, because it's like scenario 6. You usually have cards you can go to the circle test. The enemies aren't that bad. The birds aren't that bad. And there's no like the watcher's hanging out, but you can like kite the watcher around because it's like a big circle if you need to, or you can just evade it or whatever. So that one I kind of think back to as like, oh, this is like a critical story point. You know, it's the 3rd act because of the laser beam. But you know, I think it's usually just like I just gotta get through this one in order to get to Clutches of the Chaos.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it feels to me too.
Yeah, and I haven't had the crippling experience in Black Throne where you know, I just lose it a bunch because I picked wrong. I pick right a lot of the time, so therefore it's very good, you know. And anyone that picks wrong, I don't know what you're doing wrong, you know. So so I guess the last thing we wanted to think about Circle Undone is the player cards that came out in it. Are there player cards that like came out that you guys still use that are really good standouts? Like they're still very good mechanic cards, either like you generically use them or maybe like you have certain investigators that really like them a lot. I threw a bunch of them on the slide here because when I went through them, I was like, oh man, there's actually a good chunk of cards that
You forgot Henry Wan, everyone's favorite.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't mention Mr. Rook. Mr. Rook is like
Well,
Danny's like literal best friend.
So,
yeah,
And like
I
the
mean,
first card that you've ever
just looking at this list, it is like, oh man, there were a lot of really important cards in
Yeah,
this
there
cycle.
really were.
Like, what strikes me is there were a couple of cards in this cycle that we kind of immediately realized were very good and we're very interested in. So things like, Hallowed Mirror, Drawing Thin, the tarot cards, like we were kind of on board immediately. And a lot of those are still great, but there's a lot of cards that I think we kind of underestimated just how great they were. So, I mean, Deny Existence turned out to be incredibly strong and probably should be nerfed or banned or something. Crack the Case, like we started playing it immediately, but at this point, I would say it's probably the best economy card in the game, or it's certainly up there.
Yeah.
Um,
With bargain and stuff. Yeah.
it's just kind of it's just kind of nuts how good it is, right? Like,
Right.
Things like even like Knowledge's Power, a card that
Yes.
they had to bump up to 2 XP and honestly probably should just be banned. Like there were a lot of really good player cards in this cycle.
Yeah. I think my favorite, as many people know, is Hawkeye Folding Camera. And it definitely better at lower player counts, but that's one of my favorite things about some of the cards is that they change based on, like, their viability changes based on the player count. Like, there's a bunch of cards that are really good at 3 people, etc. So, like, those are my favorite things to include.
It's a really exciting card because it kind of inverts the way that player cards normally work. Like, normally player cards are things that you put in your deck and they do good things for you. Hawkeye Folding Camera is a card that you put in your deck and it makes you do things. or else it doesn't do anything for you. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm surprised that you put Another Day, Another Dollar on here and not Studious, because that's a yellow card that Dan actually uses. And Studious is just like
they're both very good. I mean, Another Day, Another Dollar is great too.
When I made this slide, I couldn't just put the secret cards on it, Dane. I had to put some diversity in here.
Here's a Survivor card that's not on the slide. I mean, obviously you can't put all the cards on the slide. I'm not saying Ben did it wrong, but Act of Desperation, a card that I think I underestimated when it first came out, turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah,
this is true.
It's a solid and fun card. It's stronger in some decks than others, but like it's great to have like a way to like make use of your empty weapon at level 0. So that's a great one to throw out.
It's the rare non-guardian tactic that is actually good for Mark. So
yeah, I mean,
other than shortcut,
we didn't really get into it, but like this set, it like introduced a whole new slot to the game with the tarot card,
right?
And it's like the tarot cards are like they're not super exciting, the base level ones, the level 1 ones, but it's like, oh, I have something to spend 1 experience on. I put this in my deck. I try to mulligan for it, and then maybe later you have to decide like, oh, is it worth trying to play this? Otherwise, it's kind of a dead card. So that's kind of cool. The Return to set, I didn't put anything with the Return to on here, even though the player cards were on Arkham DB, because I don't think we were that excited about the Return to ones. Like some of the new tarot cards are like interesting for specific investigators, but there's none that are like staples that I like put in a lot of decks.
Yeah, they're a little more specialized.
The world is really, really good, I think. But honestly, I've had several decks where I tried to fit it in and I never could, just because it's so much XP. It takes up your tarot slot.
Yeah, I have it with the world, and I really didn't like it. On the investigator who draws the most, which is Norman. No, Harvey.
Yeah.
I played it in Harvey, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna draw so many cards with this. This is great. And then I was like, oh yeah, my hand size is 10. Generally, because of his signature or having the lady out. It just, and I'd never got it in my opening hand once. And then when I did get it in my opening hand, or when I did find it, I was like, I don't want to pay 3 resources for this. And then I just tossed it. It felt really bad. And I think that we might have like overhyped it because I'm probably just never going to look at that card again. The card that I really do like, though, is the Star, because it actually incentivized me to play Tommy Muldoon. And I actually really enjoy it. It's really, really fun to get out like a Fine Clothes for 1 after having it in your opening hand, and suddenly your Fine Clothes is 2 and 2, and it's giving you $4 back. And like your medical students are 2 and 2 for 2, and you're getting $4 back. I feel like it actually makes Tommy really good, which is weird because Tommy was like one of my least favorite investigators in the entire game up until that point. So I'm happy.
Yeah, it's good to see when we get cards that kind of boost up the weaker investigators, so that definitely helped there. And this set also had the multi-class cards the first time we saw them. Obviously, saw
Oh,
them
that's right.
again recently
That's right.
in Edge of the Earth. Though I don't know if I really use any of them except like Enchanted Blade pretty generically. Scroll of Secrets, after it got errated, I use it in maybe Norman, and I use it in
Yeah,
Gloria.
it's solid.
But I don't. The other ones don't really stand out as much. There's like only 5 of them.
I mean, I can
14
tell
packs.
I can tell you haven't played Amanda because you would definitely be rocking the totem.
Grizzly Totem.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
is
and Min loves the Grizzly Totem.
the upgraded totem is incredible for basically Min and Amanda are probably the only two people who play it, but it is very very good for them.
Yeah. I've used booze a few times, and I love the booze. I will never not love the booze because I'm a rogue player. And it has some weird, funny interactions. In that, like, Rita can take it, and I think the red one dodges, like evades something when you smash it over somebody's head. So like, she also gets the extra damage off of it, which is kind of neat. The green one is actually pretty good because it lowers the cost by 1, and then it gives them +3 to a will test, which is something that like rogues are historically pretty bad at. And then also you can smash it over somebody's head and it actually does +1 damage, which is really like kind of fine. So I do like Tennessee Sour Mash a lot, but I know I can acknowledge that it's not, up to the quality of some other multi-class cards.
Yeah. But yeah, no, a lot of good cards in this set. So I'm surprised when we go back and do these visits and be like, oh yeah, like that's where all these cards came from. Like, I don't even remember playing without these before. They're great. So
And a pretty interesting set of investigators too, right?
Yeah.
Like we got the Guardian and the Seeker kind of both are like non-traditional examples of those classes. Preston and Diana both have like pretty weird mechanics. Rita, I think is a miss, but the others are all pretty cool. So
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hoping someday there will be some more tricks or something to help redeem Rita. She does run really fast. I wonder if I kind of want to try her in Edge of the Earth. Because I haven't tried. I don't think we've tried her since this originally came out. Because Dane had such a bad time playing her. Maybe I'll try her in Edge of the Earth in one of my, I'm sure, many playthroughs of that I'm gonna do. So, but yeah, pretty cool overall. I guess there weren't like there were barely any skill cards in this set. There was like one cycle of them, which is like Steadfast and.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
All the other cards that aren't Steadfast.
Oh yeah,
because Steadfast is the only one. Is the only one I think I use.
Yeah.
Able-bodied, those ones. So
Prophecy, yeah.
The one thing I did want to mention though, in addition to the player cards that we already talked about, is that Big Money made its first appearance here for rogues. In that, Big Money has like well connected, and it has the event that scales based off of the half of your money and their thing. This was kind of like the first appearance of that because Preston became.
I think people have been trying to do Big Money to some success. I know people like doing it like Jenny and Skids, but this one added a lot more support to it because Preston needed it.
Yes.
So it's definitely good to see like if there's an existing archetype that people are trying out, like it to be actually supported with new cards. So that's always very exciting. So that's definitely cool. And now that is a deck I try sometimes in Rogue. I try to go Big Money. I did it with Bob. Worked out great. He paid for lots of items and didn't do anything else really, but any other thoughts on the Circle Undone, guys, that we didn't go over?
Take 2 copies of Fine Clothes and 2 copies of Handcuffs, mostly because those cards are both fantastic and really cool, but also because you're dealing with some weird cultists and you got to talk with them. Fine Clothes makes it easier to talk with them, and when you're not talking with them, you're cuffing them.
Oh man!
Great, really fun campaign. I still think kind of a high watermark for just interestingly well designed scenarios from a gameplay perspective. So I'm always happy to revisit it. Even though as discussed, a little bit disappointed by the return to, but still a really fun campaign.
Yeah. And I feel the same. I enjoy it in multiplayer, and I like the new story paths added in the campaign. for the most part. So, overall, pretty great. Good times, and the tarot cards are great. The real physical ones. So I'm glad those exist.
Those are really cool.
ABC, always be cuffing. Thanks, Conrad.
I love that playing Gary Ross. But yeah, so thanks everybody for joining us tonight in stream, and to everybody who's listening on the podcast or on YouTube. Just a couple bits of news before we sign off tonight. Tomorrow, Friday, January 7th, I think it's at 4:30 or 5:30? 5:30? ET. Ben and Harrison are going to be playing through By the Books, which is the Roland parallel scenario that came out to kick off our new MUR Plays series. Ben and Harrison are going to be playing through each parallel investigator's unique side story with the original version of the investigator and the parallel version of the investigator. So check that out tomorrow night. And then lastly, Harrison and I are going to be joined by our friends Captain Farnies and Comfort Noise from our Discord, and we're going to be playing through the blob that ate everything for the Horror Without Borders charity stream event. And if you don't know too much about that or what that is, it's on January 8th. It's Saturday, and you could check out the Mythos Busters site for more information on that. I believe that they have an article on it.
Yeah, it's a charity event. So a couple different community creators are going to be doing streams of various things and raising money. So that'll hopefully be a fun event. And there is a blob which people can sign up and participate in, which is what Dane will be streaming. So
Do we last thing before we go, do we want to briefly mention the possibly spoiled next campaign title, or are we going to keep that on the download for now?
No, I didn't want to.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I didn't want to force that upon people, Dan.
Okay, that's fine. I just I didn't say it. I just mentioned
now it's there, and it's like a worm in their brain. They're not gonna know.
It's out there. Sometimes people post spreadsheets with product names on them, and so that's how you get names. So you can ask me, you can ping me on Discord. I can tell you if you don't know.
You know what? I'm just gonna spoil it right here. It's called Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and I'm really excited about it.
No, that's not what it is, Dan. Dang it. All right, Dan. You wanna tell people how to like and subscribe and stuff? We gotta get the
yes.
Gotta get those interactions, comment on stuff. Yeah.
Folks, what was your favorite part of the Return to the Circle Undone? Least favorite part? Is Brown Jenkins still haunting your dreams at night? If you need any resources for ridding yourself of pesky evil rat people in your dreams, or just have something you want to ask us, email us at comments@mur.fm. To stay current on what we're doing, you can follow us on social networks like Instagram, Twitch, or join our Discord server. You can find all the links to these at social.mur.fm. And if you really enjoy what we do and want to get more involved, you can become one of our patrons at patreon.com/Miskatonic University Radio, or just leave us a nice review on your favorite podcast source. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you, friends.